Welcome to the podcast called The Battle for African Agriculture, the space where we challenge dominant narratives and imagine just sustainable futures, especially when it comes to food and farming in Africa. Today, we are honored to welcome Stacy Malkan, journalist, public health advocate, and a co founder of US Right to Know, an investigative research group exposing corporate influence on our food system. Stasi is also the author of Not Just the Pretty Face, the Ugly Side of Beauty Industry, and has spent over a decade tracking how agrochemical corporations, especially those behind GMO crops and pesticides, shape food policy, science, and public perception in the United States and globally. In this episode, we'll unpack how the American food system became so deeply entangled with corporate interests, what GMOs have really delivered and what they have not, and what lessons in Africa and the rest of the world can learn from this history. Stasi, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Milian. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you very much. Stasi, can you start by telling us what led you to co-found US Right to Know and what was the moment or realization that pushed you into this work?
Yes, so it was actually concern over GMOs that led us to co-found US Right to Know. I had worked on an effort in the United States and California to label genetically engineered foods. This was in 2012, and we gathered 1 million signatures to get a question on the ballot asking voters if we should label genetically engineered foods. And this had huge support. Many people supported this. They wanted labels on our food to know if they contain GMOs. But the chemical companies, the food companies, did not want us to have this label. And so they spent an enormous amount of money, and $45 million worth of
Wow.
disinformation that was rained down upon the state over a 30-day period. And it was an incredible experience of just being bombarded constantly with misinformation, disinformation coming from multiple sources. We were hearing university professors, Nobel laureate scientists repeating inaccurate information that was coming from Monsanto and the chemical companies. We did lose that ballot initiative. The public support dropped like a rock. We did not get labeling. Over the next few years, there were several other states tried to label, and the chemical and food companies spent $100 million to stop it. So it was a sad story, but we really became very intrigued by how do they do this? How do they run these operations? How are they getting university professors and scientists to repeat talking points that are inaccurate and coming from the chemical companies? So we started to file public records requests. We use the Freedom of Information laws to get at documents from these university professors. And we were able to establish payments from the chemical companies to universities, and ways that they work this communication chain so that they're training a chorus of people to speak the words of the chemical companies, to scare people about labeling, to claim that their products are safe.
Incredible. What did you see happening in the American food system that needed exposing? I mean, in the last
Oh,
meeting that you came to, Nairobi, we met in Nairobi,
yeah,
and you were talking about the failure of the American food system and what's happening to people's health, environment.
yeah,
Can you expound on
yeah.
that?
Yeah, so the US food system is really a cautionary tale about what not to do with the food system. We have, vast swaths of land in the US are used for farming, but so much of that is used for two crops, corn and soy. These are genetically modified GMO corn and soy monocultures that depend on many chemicals. A lot of the GMOs are engineered to withstand glyphosate or Roundup herbicides. And so Once GMOs were introduced in the US in the
Mm.
mid 1990s, the use of glyphosate skyrocketed.
Uh-huh.
They've There was a study that found a 500% increase in people's bodies, in urine. So the
Mm-hmm.
amount of glyphosate detected in people's urine increased 500%
Mm.
since GMOs were on the market. So, and these crops are not used to feed people nutritious
Mm-hmm.
foods.
Mm-hmm.
They're used for biofuels or ultra processed food factories or
Mm-hmm.
factory farmed animals. So
Mm-hmm.
the crops are not being used for food, they're being used for cows, cars, and ultra processed food factories. And so we also see huge increases, major problems in chronic diseases in the
Mm-hmm.
US. 40% of kids,
Mm-hmm.
children have at least one chronic disease, skyrocketing obesity, type 2 diabetes, and other food related diseases.
Mm.
And as well as many people with cancer, there are over 100,000 people suing Bayer because
Mm.
they say that exposure to glyphosate caused them to develop non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a type of blood cancer.
Mm.
So the evidence is strong that the pesticides and the ultra processed foods are harming people, are killing people. And so we need a different food system.
Yeah,
And I
definitely.
know there's a lot of efforts to push our type of food system on Africa and that you've resisted that
Yeah, we'll come to that
successfully.
later. We'll come to that later.
Yeah.
In your view, how did the pro-GMO narrative become so dominant in the US? And who helped shape it and how?
Yeah, that's a great question because it was hard. It was almost so big that it was hard to see
Mm.
because it became this dominant wisdom that GMOs are safe and we need them. But when you really drill into it, it was a lot of propaganda coming from the chemical companies. They had
Mm.
just have a very sophisticated public relations effort. We researched into this and found that chemical companies were spending tens of millions of dollars a year
Mm. Mm.
on communications.
Mm.
So front groups that pretend that they're independent, but they're really repeating the talking points of the chemical companies.
Mm.
They were paying millions of dollars to universities and
Mm.
individual professors to
Mm.
promote their products. And that was not public information. We only found that through digging.
Mm.
Um, there are large, the entire ultra processed food industry also has a large public relations and propaganda
Mm.
effort with front groups and so forth, and they work together. The pesticides and ultra processed food
Mm.
companies promote each other's messaging. They promote the system as inevitable, as
Mm.
perfectly fine.
Mm.
There's a whole strain of this money and effort that's devoted to attacking
Mm.
critics like yourself, like
Mm.
myself, like many
Mm.
groups. We know they were tracking journalists, scientists. They put a ton of money into public health groups
Mm.
to keep them from speaking out.
Mm.
It's a money game, and the pesticide companies are spending a lot of it to
Mm.
control the narrative.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, what were the promised benefits of GMOs when they were first introduced? And what has the reality looked like decades later?
Well, farmers do like GMOs, but they really haven't lived up to their promise because the
Mm.
promise was greater yield, productivity,
Mm.
even though again it's not producing food, it's producing commodities that are
Mm.
used for things other than food. I think that's really important to look at.
Mm.
But the yield, even that has not held up. The yields over time have not increased.
Mm.
There's even some evidence that they have decreased in some cases.
Mm.
But the biggest problem is that the weeds and the bugs. Now, all of these GMOs I mentioned, now this is almost almost 100% at this
Mm.
point of corn and soy grown in the United States is genetically engineered
Mm.
either to um, resist herbicides or to produce insecticides. So it's just trying to get around the weeds and the bugs.
Mm.
But over time, what's happened is the weeds and the bugs evolve to get around these technologies. So we end up with super weeds and
Mm-hmm.
super bugs and
Mm-hmm.
needing to spray more and more and more chemicals. So it's just a pesticide treadmill.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really, it's a bad system, and then the whole system needs to change.
How's, how have public institutions like universities or regulatory bodies been influenced by corporate actors when it comes to GMO approval and promotion?
So the amount of influence that the pesticide companies are having over universities and particularly the US regulatory system, I think can't be overstated. It's enormous. Monsanto really set the stage for how GMOs would be regulated, and which is to say they are not regulated in the US. There's no pre-market safety assessments required. There's no independent testing or science. It's entirely based on industry studies and also on this outdated idea that GMOs are supposedly substantially equivalent to regular foods. What the science clearly shows that they're not, that there are many compositional changes that can happen within genetically engineered crops.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we have just a very lax, hands off, let the chemical companies do what they want based on their own data kind of system. And the universities have been a big part of promoting that as perfectly fine and safe. But the universities in the US are very dependent upon funds from the chemical companies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's become worse over the years as government funding has reduced, industry funding has increased. And
Mm-hmm.
we have even emails to top universities saying that they consider themselves like responsible for promoting GMOs. So the universities really are champions of the technology. They also can make money from patents
Mm-hmm.
from any GMOs that are developed at the
Mm-hmm.
university. So some people are making enormous money on GMOs, and that's why it's been so hard to
Mm-hmm.
oppose them publicly.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Mexico for a little bit. Huh? You wrote about Mexico's fight for food sovereignty and effort to ban the import and cultivation of GMO corn. What happened with that effort?
So Mexico is really putting up a big fight against GMOs. It's really the birthplace of corn. They have many native, beautiful varieties of corn. Um, we do not here in the US. We have GMO corn on
Mm,
across our farmland. It's very genetically non-diverse. It's very fragile. It's very
mm,
risky.
mm,
So Mexico is saying we don't want that corn. They put out a decree a few years ago saying we won't accept the cultivation of GMO corn in Mexico. It's not allowed, and we don't want to import GMO corn from the US. So that was challenged by the US in a trade dispute that
mm,
went on for some years. And the US did win in the sense that Mexico agreed that they would accept the import of GMO corn, but they're still banning the cultivation of it. And I think there are other ways that they can keep US corn out of their tortillas. They
mm,
really eat high amounts of unprocessed corn in Mexico, and I know some parts of Africa do as
mm.
well, eat
Yeah,
very high amounts of unprocessed corn. So with the GMO corn, you'd be eating a lot more of it than people in the
yeah,
US, because as I said, our corn is going to feed cows and cars and
yeah,
processed food
yeah,
factories.
no,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
And in the
absolutely.
process of the Mexican trade dispute, this is really important. They put together a lot of, they put together what I think is the most recent comprehensive analysis of the science
Mm,
on genetically modified foods and glyphosate to
mm,
look at what are the health risks and put those together in a very lengthy report with tons of scientific references that really goes through the concerns about insecticidal
mm,
BT
mhm,
GMO corn, which has which new science is really showing again the compositional differences between the foods, and also the fact that they're stacking GMO traits on top of each other. So there are novel proteins, potential allergens, and other changes in the food that are concerning to the scientists,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the huge increase in glyphosate. And there's a lot of science documenting glyphosate links to cancer,
Mm-hmm.
reproductive problems, fertility issues, and particularly liver problems and also kidney problems.
Mm-hmm.
So glyphosate exposure and GMOs really can't even be separated
Yep.
because most GMOs are getting high levels of glyphosate in the crops.
Yep. Incredible. In the US, over 100,000 people are suing Bayer. Um, they have absorbed Monsanto. They're in a big problem now. With claims that exposure to glyphosate based herbicides caused them to develop cancer. What is happening with the
Yeah.
lawsuits?
So the lawsuits are very threatening to Bayer. Juries have come back with huge awards in the billions of dollars. And Bayer has won some of the lawsuits, but
Mm,
ones that they have lost, the losses have just been huge. And the company is really freaked out about that. And they are
mm,
now saying publicly, just recently, that they have to get immunity from these lawsuits from the US government or from state governments.
mm,
Otherwise, they may not be able to continue selling glyphosate. So I think that's a really stark admission of a company that has made terrible choices
mhm,
and they can't survive the science that is convincing juries that their product is causing cancer.
mm,
And because so many internal documents have come out in these lawsuits, also convincing juries that they knew that there was a risk and they
mm,
failed to warn
mm.
consumers. So it's a big
Incredible.
problem for Bayer. And so they're now going to state legislators and asking for immunity.
Mm,
They did, this did happen in one state, and we don't know what the outcome of this is going to be, but I think it's important we'll be watching it closely to
mm,
see what happens.
excellent.
And obviously they should not be getting immunity because that's one of the only recourses that consumers in the US have when they're getting harmed by a product is to take a
Mm,
company to
mm.
court.
Yep. You've done deep work on how corporations shape not just policies, but public discourse. Can you talk about the strategies used, especially by Monsanto and others, to influence media, science, and academia? You have alluded to that before, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. So the lawsuits that I just mentioned produced many corporate documents came out in the lawsuits, and we also at U.S. Right to Know did an investigation looking for documents when we investigated how are these companies working with universities, like who's paying who, how does the system work.
Mm,
So as a result of all of that, we had a huge many documents to look through.
mm,
And so we analyzed them to write a report about the question you just asked. What are the tactics that they're using?
mm,
And we came up with like five main ways that they're manipulating the public, misleading the public and
mm,
regulators. And those are they put a lot of work into manipulating the scientific record in the first
mhm,
place. So there's a lot of evidence of how Monsanto ghost wrote studies. They gin up particular studies to sell
mhm,
particular narratives. They handpick scientists to write favorable studies,
mhm,
etc.
mhm,
They also really depend on universities. So there's a lot of money going to universities for professors to
mm,
speak out and give them that the white coat gloss. Like they
mhm,
know that people don't trust the companies, So they go to the academics to
Mm,
do their
mm,
product defense work.
mhm,
Third tactic, and this was huge, they put tons of money into front groups, like I said before, just lots of front groups and sciencey sounding groups and food integrity groups and genetic literacy project, American Council of Science on Health, with names like these that just put out constant um, content about the Cornell Alliance for Science was one of
yeah,
them that was
yeah.
funded by the Gates Foundation, putting out constant content saying GMOs and pesticides are safe, the
Mm,
activists are crazy, attacking certain scientists.
mm,
A fourth technique was the attack strategies. Just attack and try to reduce the credibility of anybody
mm,
who's speaking out about GMOs and pesticides, whether it's a scientist, a reporter, a politician, whoever.
mm,
They really closely track what people are saying online.
mm,
And the fifth strategy was the website strategies, which they've been pioneering for decades. Monsanto was really a front runner of tracking what people are saying online, putting together fake websites, fake people. Some of your listeners may have noticed if they're speaking out about GMOs or pesticides, they get attacked by a bunch of random
yeah.
people. That's all orchestrated
Mm,
behind the scenes. They're working with very powerful PR firms that
mm,
have lots of people devoted to tracking what people are saying,
mm,
pitching reporters, buddying up to reporters, um,
mm,
just coming at you from all angles. And that was surprising even for me. I've been studying this for lots of years, but just the amount of money and effort they have to put out at jamming the signals of what people are talking about and blanketing the space with misinformation, I think is really a sign of how fragile the business
yeah,
model
yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. No, excellent. Yeah. Last year we found out that USAID was paying PR firm to track and attack critics of GMOs, including AFSA, and I was included, I think, in that. What happened, and is that
Yeah.
still going?
Yeah, that was crazy. USAID spent, I think it was $400,000 on this PR firm
Mm,
called Vfluence. It's run by a fellow named Jay Byrne, who was Monsanto's former communications director.
mm,
He was actually the one that pioneered what I was just talking about, the fake websites, the
mm,
fake people that would attack
mm,
critics. He's been doing this for decades, and he's really made a whole business model out of getting the chemical companies all upset about how the threat of activists and getting people to give him money to attack
mm,
us, to
mm,
attack anyone who's writing about this. So this all came out due to some documents that were found by a group named Lighthouse Reports, and they
mm,
had a big focus on Africa, on
mm,
attacking AFSA. I mean, this again just shows how fragile they are and how worried they are about the kind of activism that AFSA is doing, about the
mm,
groundswell of support for agroecology.
mm,
Um, so they got caught out with all this. They had a list of like thousands of activists and groups that they were keeping tabs on.
mm,
And then they further had like this a newsletter that was going out to lots of people, including people in the U.S. government, the Cornell Alliance for Science. Just all these groups would repeat Jay Burns' messaging
mm,
about who to attack. He would say, "Here's an article, go after them.
mm,
Here's an article to promote."
mhm,
So he was really running this um, swift PR shop for rapid response on any news that was coming out
mm,
about GMOs. So he was caught. They did say he's getting sued. I think that well, they say it has stopped. The USAID has stopped giving them money,
mhm,
as it stopped giving many programs money. So
mm,
in this case, it's a good thing that they are supposedly no longer paying Jay Byrne from US government money, but the chemical companies are surely still supporting him.
mhm. Incredible. Um, what has been the most disturbing or revealing documents you've come across in your investigations?
Yeah, that's a good question. To me, it's just very disturbing the level to which the chemical companies are manipulating the scientific record in the
Mm,
first place.
mm,
And this goes back decades,
mm,
since the very beginning. They are ginning up studies to tell certain narratives that their products are safe. Um, and you can see in these emails that the scientists would look at a particular problem. For example, genotoxicity
mm,
with glyphosate, and that's
mhm,
a way of changing cells and making them more susceptible to cancer. So
mhm,
there's evidence that glyphosate is linked to genotoxicity, and rather than saying like, hey, that's a problem, maybe we should figure out how to make our products
mm,
safer, they say, how can we hire a scientist to write a study that says genotoxicity is not a problem?
mm,
So, this is why they're getting in trouble with juries in the United
mm.
States. When juries see this stuff, they're not fans of Monsanto. When the
Yeah.
scientists are openly speaking about, oh, it's the surfactants that are a big problem with glyphosate. It's not just glyphosate in Roundup, it's other chemicals that are not even disclosed. And they're saying, well, those other chemicals are a problem. They're not changing, what are they doing with that information? They're
Mm,
just trying to
mm,
keep it from getting out to the public, from hurting their profit lines. We don't see
mm,
evidence of them trying to create safer products.
mm,
So it's just it's a fundamental problem. Um,
mm,
and it really is not a good look for that company when these documents have come out. And I think that Bayer did really a disservice to their shareholders and to everybody by buying Monsanto. And that seems to be becoming obvious to them now when they're having to apologize and figure out how to try to evade liability for all of the people with cancer that are suing them.
mm. Incredible. What are the main public health or environmental concerns tied to GMOs and chemical intensive model they're part of?
Yeah. Well, the monoculture system just has so many problems. It's
Mm,
completely dependent on chemicals.
yeah,
And as I said earlier, it's you need to keep ramping up the use of chemicals, more and more and more glyphosate.
yeah.
But not only glyphosate, what the companies are doing now to respond to the super weeds is that they're trying to genetically engineer crops to withstand multiple pesticides. So
Mm-hmm,
glyphosate, dicamba, 2,4-D, other older and even more toxic pesticides. So
mm-hmm,
they just want to have a cocktail of
mm-hmm,
chemicals. The way the GMOs work is that you can spray glyphosate on, just everywhere, and it will kill everything green except
mm-hmm,
for the plant that's genetically engineered to resist it.
mm,
And so what's that doing to the soil? There's evidence about breakdown in the soil, and soil health in general is just terrible. Um, the other There's evidence of harm to bees and butterflies. Another thing that's happening with the BT corn
mm-hmm,
that's engineered to express an insecticide, all of the seeds, because that doesn't work until a seed is sprouted into a
mm-hmm,
plant, and then when a bug eats it, they'll die because of the
mm-hmm,
BT that's engineered into the plant. But they're coating these seeds with neonicotinoids so that the seed is supposedly protected before it grows.
mm-hmm,
Now, these seed coatings there's a lot of evidence showing massive harm to bees and pollinators, which of course we depend on for our food system. So
mm-hmm,
it's just chemical cocktails that are causing so many problems to biodiversity, to human health, to pollinators that we depend on for our food system, to the soil health. And again, all of this to grow food that's not even feeding people. It's feeding
yeah,
cars,
definitely. Yeah. Mm,
cows, and these factory farms and the ultra processed foods that are making kids sick.
Hmm.
And I know that you've seen similar trends in South Africa where GMOs have been embraced, and there's now many health trends that are tracking with the United States
Hmm.
that are linked to ultra processed foods with the diabetes, the
Yeah,
obesity, and chronic disease, even for kids.
exactly. Yeah.
So we just
Uh,
need a different food system.
mm, mm. So, how does lack of transparency in GMO research and regulation pose a risk to democracy and public well-being?
Yeah, that's a great question because they've had to hide a lot of the true facts,
Mm,
and certainly they were so worried about labels on
mhm,
food in the U.S. that they spent $100 million to try to stop labeling,
mhm,
and they succeeded for the most part. Um, I think it's also important to know, and they'll say like thousands of studies have shown that GMOs are safe, but then when
mm,
you actually look at those thousands of studies, they're not about health effects.
mhm,
They're about performance benefits or other things that the companies are studying to try to sell these crops.
mm.
Um, so there's not we now have a long track record in the US about benefits and risks, and there's just it's really hard to see any scenario in which these crops make sense.
Yeah, excellent. Let's come to our continent, Africa. Many of the same corporations and strategies that shaped US food policy are now active in Africa. What warning signs should African countries be watching out for?
Well, yeah, these companies do not. I think one of the things that is really striking about the agrochemical industry, it's now the majority of the world's pesticides and seeds are in the hands of just a few companies. And all of those companies have long track records of hiding science, lying to the public about dangerous products that they sell.
Mm,
And dangerous products that they sell that don't have a lot of benefits, if any benefits, they don't have benefits for consumers.
mhm,
So I think the danger is they're looking to Africa as a lot of open land that could be transformed into monocultures of corn and soy that are used as commodity crops
mm.
rather than used to grow food for people. And I think you have a great opportunity there to stop this before it happens.
Yeah, thank you very much. If you are advising African governments or civil society today, what would you urge them to consider before embracing GMOs?
To look at the independent science on GMOs, to look also at the independent science on glyphosate because it's inseparable. GMOs and glyphosate,
Yep,
or
yep.
the scientists can't even tell if they're seeing health risks, which one they're coming from.
Mm,
Um, so I think looking at the independent science is really important. Um, Having good safety protocols in
mm,
place is really important, including transparency. Like transparency needs to be a big
mm,
part of it. Where are GMOs being grown? What pesticides are being used? Regulations on pesticides so that you don't get countries sending banned pesticides to Africa. I know that's a big problem
yep.
from the Europe. Europe bans a lot more pesticides than the US does.
Mm,
Um, and I think just generally really thinking about how can you have local control over your farming systems?
mm,
How can your resources be in the hands of the farmers who know how to grow food and
mm.
not in the chemical companies that are trying to sell products and be the middleman?
Yeah, definitely. Um, Now coming to hopefully the positive one. What has given you hope in the US or globally? Are there grassroots movements, local food systems, or policy shifts that offer a better model?
Yeah, well, your group gives me a lot of hope, Milian. I think
Thank
the
you.
work of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty Africa is amazing, and
Mm,
and we in the U.S. I get a lot of hope from. I do live in California, where there's
mhm,
a strong local food system, and so local farmers markets where you can buy food directly from farmers.
mm,
I'm so grateful to have that. You know, we don't have that in a lot of the United States. We have what we call food deserts,
mm.
where there's not good grocery stores, there's not good access to healthy local foods. So um, I think that's super important for the future that we look at how to build robust, locally controlled food systems based on agroecological principles, just
Mm.
what you're working on. I think
Yeah,
that's crucial, especially given what we're facing for climate change, and especially given what we saw during COVID, which was just the breakdown of food availability,
yeah.
and also just the huge burden that was taken on by farm workers and by meat packing workers, and you know,
Mm,
those folks were just getting sick at much higher rates, and they're paid so little. It's a bad system for farmers and for food workers and for eaters. You know, the only ones benefiting from this industrial food chain are the corporate profits.
mm.
So there's a lot of changes to make, but we're focusing on hope. So I get inspired by young people who want to farm.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to figure out how to grow food on my property, and I think that would be a good idea for all of us with the future that we're facing of so many converging ecological problems.
Thank you so much. Do you think the tide is turning in terms of public awareness and resistance to corporate control of our food?
I do. I think it's
Yeah.
an exciting time. In the US today, just today, there was a report released from the administration, the Make America Healthy Again Commission report, talking about the huge problem of the chronic disease burden, of
Mm,
the millions of kids who are getting sick, and ultra processed foods are a key problem there, and so are
mm,
the pesticides. So
mm,
we're talking about it. Um,
mm.
that's a big deal for the US, but I think it's important to say, like, the concerns over the unhealthy food systems are so broad-based and loud now in the
Mhm,
US that even our political system is having to face them
mhm,
after so many years of ignoring them. And again, I just think it's a cautionary tale for the rest of the world. You know, they
mhm.
say we have the most supposedly efficient or industrialized food system here,
Yeah,
and it's
that's the
clearly not
impression.
working. Yeah,
That's the
it's
impression.
clearly
Yeah.
not working. There's massive public pushback against it because kids are sick,
Yeah.
because kids have cancer, because even young people are having trouble getting pregnant,
Mm,
because farm working communities are devastated with cancers and other health problems.
yeah.
The evidence is just so strong it can't be ignored anymore that we need a different food system.
Your final reflections. What's the one thing that you wish every citizen knew about how food system is governed?
Um, I wish that everyone knew that that we have to trust ourselves and our own bodies, and that
Yeah.
food can make us sick, but it can also heal us, and it can heal us in so many ways. And I
Yeah.
think that's in individual ways. It can heal
Yeah.
illnesses, it can heal our bodies, but it
Mm,
can also heal communities. And
mm,
so I'm excited about the possibility to have to figure out how can we shift back to locally controlled food systems here, and how can we work internationally to help struggles around the world as people are trying to reclaim and rebuild food systems, and take power back from the corporations that have put us in a terrible place. But it's not too late to change course.
definitely. Finally, how can people, especially in the global south, stay informed about and push back against misinformation and corporate influence?
Yeah, so we have lots of great resources on our website,
Mm,
usrtk.org. That's US Right to Know. We did a report called Merchants of Poison that
mhm,
has all of the strategies that mentioned based on Monsanto's own documents
Mm-hmm.
in their own words about how they're manipulating the science and fooling the public. We also have some really great fact sheets where we compile the science on glyphosate,
Yeah.
atrazine, other chemicals of concern, and also ultra processed foods. And we keep those updated regularly so you can just see like what's the best science and the best peer reviewed public health journals saying. And the science is coming out all the time. We are constantly
Yeah.
updating our glyphosate fact sheet because there's science coming out weekly. It's hard to even keep up with.
Mm.
So the scientific evidence is there, and we're just trying to put it into people's hands so that you can hopefully use it in your campaigns and policy fights. So you can find all that at
Mm.
usrtk.org. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, you can email me at Stacy, Stacy, at usrtk.org. And we'll also be having a podcast, a webinar in a couple of weeks about GMOs, which hopefully you can promote to
Okay,
your
thank you.
groups.
Mm.
Yeah, that's going to be on June 5th. It'll be a conversation with the Mexican
Yeah,
scientists
yeah,
who
yeah. We
compiled the evidence for Mexico's fight. And then we'll be hearing also from some folks working in Africa on what's happening with GMO campaigns there.
I was promoting that actually. Yeah, in Africa. So
Yes.
yeah. Thank you so much, Stasi. That was really, really great and very much educating. And thanks a lot. It's very
Thank you.
early at your side of the world. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you also for your work, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you. Cheers.